All right, here we go. I'm gonna wipe my camera off. So wipe this off really good. All right. Make sure camera's good. All right, much better, much better. All right. Check my other little monitor. Take my other monitor. All right. Okay. All right. All right. All right. We in the house. We in the house. Let me get my coffee right here. Grabbing my coffee. All right. All right. All right. All right. We got a good number of people in here. All right. Grab my coffee. All right. All right. Good evening. I'm your host, the intellectual Lord Benjamin Manhattan, and this is Supreme American TV. But before I start off and introducing the title, and I'm not trusting, and I'm not deliver this message. The title I'm going to be doing tonight, things I want to be speaking on. For all the thinkers, I want all the thinkers to come in. The title I'm going to be speaking on is the transatlantic slave story, this transatlantic slave ship story, the dumbest story ever told, the transatlantic slave trade. People will sit up here and point to this, and it's sad that people will sit up here and point to this. Say it now. Say what? It's a little blurry. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Should be good now. It's sad that people will sit up here and point to this story. Hold on to this story. Can you give me some water, please? There. Mix my water. Get my water because we're going to get into this. It's sad that in 2025, people still point to this story and act like it carries some sort of validity when it comes to the our existence here in America. When people still pointing to the transatlantic slave trade and saying that we so-called Black Americans all got here by a slave boat, that a bunch of slave ships brought us over here from Africa. Now, keep in mind, there were no slave ships at the time. A bunch of slave boats brought over 12 million people, 12.6 million from Africa from the 1500s. I'm going to give them a good estimate about 1500s, right? The Nation of Islam says 1555, all the way up until 1809, because you do know that this would be roughly 200 and some odd years of bringing 16.5 million people over here, right? This is the story we're being told. We're being told that 12.6 million people were brought over here in the span of 250 some odd years, right, from Africa. That they got a workforce from Africa, the so-called Europeans, the white Europeans who were immigrants themselves in America, right? Who went over into Africa. And, one of my wives made a good point. How did they know to go into Africa and that these people that they were just grabbing from all over the place would be good workers in America? How did they know that? How did they make you think that they had the ships, which they didn't, to bring over these millions of Africans? And that's how we were brought into America, so-called Black Americans, so-called African Americans. All right. Now, keep in mind, this is Europeans who are still immigrants themselves. The English came over here. The English were in mass here. It wasn't, and some of the Scots, but it wasn't really any other Caucasians here in America like that. It was the English and the Scots. Some, Scotch English, as they say. I think a few Irish they came a little later. The Irish came later, but it was basically the English and the Scottish. Now, y'all see the English people today, okay? You see the English today, and you see how they carry themselves. They tend to be the Caucasian English tend to be the most softest males on earth. I'm gonna be honest with you. Everybody y'all know about the Caucasian English men. They tend to be the softest males on earth. They're not very violent. So you're gonna tell me that these Caucasian English males went over into Africa and got these rough Africans, right, and put them in slavery and brought them here. I guess some of the Spanish helped them, right? The Euro Spanish. But this is the story. They brought every so-called black person that got here is due to a slave ship, or that you're linked to some sort of slave ship. They don't tell you where in Africa they got you, just that you came from Africa. Hmm? Because, and then of course later on they added it was West Africa they got all the so-called black people from. Right? Now, they continue to tell this story over and over again and continue to make it seem like we were forced to immigrate over here to work in cotton fields, tobacco, sugar, right? Now, here's a bunch of people, and I pointed this out on on TikTok. I said they brought a bunch of people over here who, when they got off the ships, these people had to be slave ready, meaning that they had to start working immediately. Okay, they had to be slave work ready. They had to start working immediately. How do you work a bunch of people who are coming off of boats, cramped up, sailing in the same position? Because that's what they said. They had us in the same position for month, 2-3 months at a time, depending on the sail. People cramped in the same positions because they couldn't get up and move because there wasn't enough space. Because again, keep in mind, these were boats. They were not ships. There were no ships yet until 1850. So, and they stopped bringing, they supposedly say they stopped bringing slaves over into America about 1809, right? So these people were coming over in cramped conditions, chained together on top of each other, right? Chained together on top of each other. And, you know, there was no bathrooms. People just had to defecate and urinate on themselves. The women had to have their menstrual cycle, all this filth. And what the white people did was they threw water down on them and threw bleach on them or whatever they threw on them to clean them, right? And they threw whatever slop they had to throw down on them to eat that, but they're chained up, so they can't eat. Their hands are chained up and whatnot. And with all this going on, who was going down in the bottom of these ships to feed these people? They were throwing food down there, throwing water and slop down there to feed these people. Now, after this 3-month trip or whatever, how long it took months, because keep in mind, these are boats, right? And there were no there were sails, but there were no motors. There were no steamboats. So they brought these people over here after months of being cramped up and on each other, chained together so they couldn't move, because they did that because, number one, it wasn't no room. It wasn't so much a security thing. They said it was no room, so they had to keep them in their spaces locked in chains, right? So they brought all these people over here, and when they got off the boats, they were supposed to be ready to work. They don't know no English. They don't know English. Whatever African language they spoke, they are supposed to be ready to work, go in the fields and start picking cotton, right? Now, I don't care how much you beat the people. I don't care how much you threaten the people. If they don't understand your language, how are you going to get them to work? How are you going to get a bunch of people to work who don't understand your language, don't understand what you're talking about? They scared to death. They just went through a traumatizing thing. Those who didn't die, because most of these people would have died on their way over to the voyage, or they would have just killed them, right? So make this make sense. How are these people ready to work as soon as you get them off the boat? See, we should ask questions like this, because I'm sorry, people just believe Caucasian people too much. You believe these racist Caucasian historians way too much. Y'all believe the nonsense they say way too much. Now, if somebody said that about white people and put that story out there, they would have debunked the hell out of it. They would have been debunked the hell out of that. They would have been debunked the hell out of the transatlantic slave trade if it was white people. If they would have said these people went over into Europe and got all these white people and put them on boats and brought them over from Europe, and they were peeing and urinating and women having their menstrual cycle on them, they'd have been like, that's crazy. They would have been trying to debunk that. They would have been asking, well, where'd the boats come from? Who made the boats? Where did the lumber come from to make these boats? Where did the lumber come from? What length, they would just been asking a lot of questions. You see, they would have been like, they doubt it. But, funny, Black people don't ask these questions. Black American people don't ask these questions. They don't ask where in Africa they come from. Shouldn't there be more stories of Africa somewhere? I don't care if you, because again, why would you tell people don't talk about your African heritage, your African roots? Shouldn't there be more stories than Alex Haley's roots about being brought over to Africa? Shouldn't somebody, because our people tend to, carry the oral tradition, shouldn't they have passed down that story to their grandchildren to know where they came from in Africa? How many of y'all ever heard an oral story from your family members about coming from Africa? How many of y'all ever heard that? You see? How many of you, any of your family members have ever said that, hey, we came over here on African slave ships? We came over here on African slave ships, and we came from this part of Africa and this, that, and the third. Now, you know why that nonsense with roots, right? Because again, that was a heavy programming tool that was put on so-called Black Americans, Roots, which came out in 1977, written by Alex Haley, right? Who plagiarized the story called The African, where he added the Kunta Kinte part in. You can look this up. I keep bringing this. I said, why would Alex Haley have to lie? Why would he have to plagiarize from somebody else's book if that really was his family's story? Why would he have to plagiarize Kunta Kinte? You do know Kunta Kinte is plagiarized from a book called The African that was written by a white man named Harold Corlander. And Alex Haley was sued, and this guy won. They proved that Alex Haley copied this guy's work and put it into Roots, into his book. I don't know what was wrong with Alex Haley. Like, he didn't think nobody would ever find out. But then when the Walper Company and ABC bought the book, they didn't do no fact checking. They had to pay this guy out. So why is that never talked about? How come you got to really look and find that story about Alex Haley plagiarizing from a book called The African, written by a Caucasian male called Harold Corlander, who made up the Kunta Kinte character? How come they don't tell you that about Roots? Why do they still make it seem like there was a real person named Kunta Kinte who comes from Alex Haley's bloodline, who's his forefather from Africa? Why they make it seem? And then they give this part in Africa, right? They said someplace in West Africa. I forget, if you look on Roots, they said that's where they got them from. Now, they were saying these places didn't even exist yet. But all of a sudden in the story, you know exactly where these Africans come from, Kunta Kinte come from, right? And they bring them on these big slave ships. Again, there were no slave ships, there were boats. And these people got there just fine. They got sold onto plantations. They didn't know how to speak no English. Who would buy these people? Who would buy a bunch of sick people, a bunch of people with all kinds of sores on them? Because imagine how they smelled when they came off the ships. Imagine the mind state they went. Who would buy these people? Who would pay money for these people? Who in their right mind would pay money for people like this? I see. People could say whatever they want to. Remember, I told you, people could say whatever they want to, but this is where we have to apply logical thinking, logical sense. When something don't make sense, I don't care what somebody wrote or what somebody's saying. When something don't make sense, when things are not adding up, then we got to start investigating. Keep in mind, these are the very same people, right? These white racist historians who told us about the transatlantic slave trade. These are the very same people that said that the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians, are white. The ancient Egyptians, the North Africans. Now, I thought we were supposed to be Africans, but we the uncivilized Africans. The civilized Africans are the ones who they like that built ancient Egypt. The North Africans. The ancient Egyptians are white. This is the same people that teach that the ancient Egyptians are white, even though we seeing bronze-skinned people with froze on the damn wall, braids, women with dark skin, but those are white people. This is what they'll sit here and lie in our face, and like we're not knowing what we're seeing here. These are the same people that tell you that there's a transatlantic slave trade and that 12.6 million people were brought here, so-called Africans were brought here to these shores. These are also the same people that will tell you we got black skin. Tariq Nasheed said we got black skin. And funny, Tariq Nasheed believes in the transatlantic slave ship story as well. Right? He believes in the transatlantic slave ship story as well. He said they did bring Africans over from. Why would they do that? Why would they bring Africans over from Africa when they had indigenous black people here? Now they just admitting now that we're indigenous so-called black people here. But people like your Tariq Nasheed, they try to minimize the number. They try to make it seem like, oh, you know, it was just a little bit. See, it was these transatlantic, these Africans that came over here and they mixed in with us, and there was an ethnogenesis, and they changed the whole game. And we African, we got African genetics, and we from Africa, but we got American DNA in us. He made that up. He made it up. Let me ask you a question. Why would I go to Africa and get a workforce from Africa? Why would I go there and get a bunch of foreigners from Africa? And I'm already a foreigner here. Keep in mind that the first successful white colony here in America was in Virginia in 1619 in Jamestown. That was the first successful European colony here in America. Okay. And the reason why it was successful is because they were kidnapping indigenous so-called black people, the real American Indians, because it would make sense that they would kidnap these people because these were the skilled labor. These were people that been here, who came from South America and into Central America and into North America, from one continent to the next into America, and started living here as the Mayans and as the Aztecs, and over time broke up into many indigenous groups. That's how you got all these American indigenous groups all over the place. They are the product of the Mayan and Aztecs who made their way over from South and Central America, who were so-called black people, right? Full-blooded so-called black people. You look at the Mayans, you look at the real Mayans, the real picture of the bone and punk temples. You look at the Mayans, you look at the Aztec, you look at the Olmec. It's all the same people that made their way into North America. You still got people with Olmec features. You still got people with Olmec features, bronze people with Olmec features, broad faces. You know, Tariq Nasheed got Olmec face. I got an Olmec face and some Mayan mixed in. I got pictures of the Mayans, the original Mayans. They look just like me. You know, these people made it into North America, and they set up here in North America, and they was here for thousands upon thousands of years, and they were living here. They had villages. They were farming the land, living on the land, not living off the land like the Native Americans. They were living actually on the land, building. You can look this up. They had tons and tons of a bunch of farmland, a bunch of villages with homes and things like that built all out. Each tribe of people spread out all over the country. Right now, they weren't together collectively, but they, you know, knew about each other, communicated. This came from, again, the Mayans and the Aztec who made their way over there. And they tell you from the Mayans came the Cherokees. The Cherokees came out of the Mayans. You see? So these people are here and they're spread out all over the place. Why would I go all the way to Africa to get Africans when there's a workforce, there's people here that's working already? There's people here that's living on the land, building on the land, actually building homes and things on the land, actually farming the land. Why would I go away to Africa to get these people who are not doing anything? You said, now this doesn't even make sense. The white man said that the Africans were a bunch of savages. This is what your racist Caucasians say. The Africans were a bunch of savages. You see, the Africans were a bunch of savages that they brought, that they went and they were swinging in trees and they was eating all kinds of filthy food and whatnot, and they were living outdoor. So why would you bring these people over to work? Why would you bring these savages over here to work? You see the European English. Do they look like they could fight against them goddamn Africans? Do they look like they can enslave a bunch of Africans, these Europeans? The most they ever did was they went into Africa and they brought their forces and their weapons into Africa, but they ain't taking no Africans nowhere because it would be like a fish out of water. Why would you take a whole bunch of people, a whole different culture of people who do not know America, and you would bring their head and just to pick cotton? Just to pick cotton. Think about that. You brought them here just to pick cotton. You brought a bunch of African savages way across the Transatlantic Ocean to pick cotton. Do that even make sense? But you did all that for people to pick cotton. Yet you had all these people here. You had whites here, white immigrants here, who were starving over here, would have did anything to eat. You don't make them pick cotton, but they had them as indentured servants. You don't make them pick cotton. Who was growing the cotton? Who was harvesting the cotton? Because they make it seem like the white man came over here and he got things going. You know, he got things going, and then as he got the machine going, he just went out and got a bunch of African slaves to work the land. That don't even make sense. You're gonna civilize a bunch of people who you call savages to come over here and pick cotton. You taught them how to comb their hair and wash themselves. Y'all really believe that? You really believe that from a bunch of people who was in England, who were the filthiest people in England, who was throwing crap out the window, who was shitting in bags and throwing them out the window, urinating in the streets, right? Washing once a year. This is what your Caucasians was doing in England. Because these are the people that came over here. The Spanish and whatnot. Like I said, it was very few of them over here. Very few. But the ones they got over here, because they, again, when they would come over here into America, it was literally like a death mission. They didn't know America like that. They wasn't coming over here in large numbers. Caucasians was not coming over into America in large numbers because America was used as a penal colony by England. Y'all know that, right? America was used originally as a penal colony for England. In other words, they would just send people over here when they emptied out the jails, and that's how a lot of Caucasian people got over here. They were emptying out jails in Europe from these people who were committing all kinds of crimes and things like that. And the jails was full of these people, so they would literally empty out the prisons and just put these people on boats and send them over here. Sometimes they would die on the boat. Sometimes they would have diseases on the boats. So they brought a lot of disease over here. These Caucasians, these Europeans, they brought a lot of diseases over here. They were sick. Some of them, the ones that survived, they ended up, getting land over here, trying to set up colonies over here, and they succeeded. I mean, they didn't succeed originally until they started enslaving the indigenous black people, because it makes sense if you think about it, because they want you to believe there was no indigenous black people here. White historians want you to believe there was no indigenous black people here. There were no indigenous black people here. Every black, so-called black person that came here came by some African slave ship. But now they're admitting it because, like I said, when I started reading about the description of the indigenous peoples here, the people who the white man was calling Indians, he was describing black people. He wasn't describing these Mongoloid natives. They didn't come till the 1800s. Later on in the 1800s, that's when they got here. Prior to that time, when they were showing Indians, because they talked about the Africans and they talked about the Americans, the American indigenous people, and they talked about the Africans, and they always knew that these people were different people. They always knew that these people were different people. If an African was over here in North America, that was a big thing, because the Africans they did get, most of them came over here with them from Europe. You do know there were Africans in Europe, that just because, again, Africa, Asia, and Europe is all one landmass. That's all connected. There's no water that separates them, so that means it's all one landmass. So a lot of Africans came over and went into Europe, and a lot of these people came over from Europe with these people. That's why when you hear about, say, Columbus, he was sailing with so-called Africans, really Moors. He was sailing with them and bringing them over here where they came from. They was all in Spain and stuff like that. So they was bringing so-called Africans because, again, everybody was African. Anybody with dark skin and woolly hair was African to them. So these people were already integrated into European society. You had so-called black people in European society. They were bringing these people with them. Okay. They were coming over because they knew that there was indigenous people here that looked like these people over here. So they wanted to bring the so-called Africans over to try to communicate with them, because I guess they felt like, because they knew our people was already over here, the indigenous people. So they would bring the Africans who was already in places like Spain, which makes sense because Columbus had Africans with him, so-called Africans who he brought with him into America. They would come with them. They would come with them from Europe, from England, and a lot of them came here that way. They didn't come on. They didn't go to no place in Africa, parts unknown. They didn't go. Do you really think they went to a place? Where was they going, parts unknown in Africa, to get all these people? Because it wasn't until this time they start claiming that, oh, it was we got all these people from Ghana. They start making up that nonsense, and they start talking they got slaves from Uganda. That's a lie. They never had Ugandan history. They never had no slaves, because if you look at the Ugandans, you don't see nobody here in America that look like Ugandans. Ugandans look like Idi Amin. Y'all know how Idi Amin look? You notice the Africans that they claim, because the Africans look, the Africans that look like Manute Bol, the Kimbe Mutombo, Idi Amin. You don't see no Africans over here that look like that. You don't see no Africans. That's how the Africans look. You don't see no people over here that look like that. You didn't see people back then. You seen people over here look like me, right? And you could clearly see we not African. We don't have the same hairline. That's funny. Again, I'm pointing out to Tariq Nasheed. He constantly points out the difference between us and Africans. He constantly points out this difference about our hairlines, how our foreheads is. He's constantly pointing out the difference, how their hairline is messed up and go all the way back. We ain't got that. If you look back at the people in the Bone and Pong temples, they got full afros, full American fros. I call them afros, not afros. They got full on fros and whatnot. And they got hair, and the women got braids, and they got afros hair. Again, that's indigenous to America. That what you call an afro, because that hairstyle was given that name in the 60s. But that's not the proper term for it. That's not the name they was using back then. But that hairstyle is popular in America amongst the indigenous people, not amongst the Africans. But so they say they brought all these Africans over here, right? And they civilized these Africans. Really? How'd you civilize these Africans? And then I was reading to y'all a couple of days ago about these women, right, who families, were in slavery, bronze women, so-called black women who family was in slavery, and they was telling their stories about how their grandmother and them was saying how they was kidnapped. They were free people. They were free people who were kidnapped by gangs of white slave catchers. They was doing that. They was kidnapping free people and forcing them to work. They were kidnapping free indigenous people and forcing them to work. Now, wait a minute. These couldn't have been Africans, because if you brought an African here, that meant you was planning to make that African a slave forever. You wasn't going to free no African, especially if he was a good worker. What would the African do? No, they kidnapped free people. They kidnapped free indigenous people to the land. Why? Because they knew they would make good workers. Why would you kidnap Africans? Again, if you brought over 12 million Africans, why would you need to kidnap anybody? The way they make it sounds like all black people in America were slaves. That's a lie. That's the same way they go and say, if they see some people in the projects or in the hood, all you black people on the projects, all y'all on welfare. You see, that's what they do. They generalize everybody to the lowest standard when it comes to so-called black people. They generalize everybody. You see, all you black people, if a few black people get welfare, all black people get welfare. If a few black people live in the projects, all black people live in the project. If a few black people commit crimes, all black people commit crimes. But they don't say it about white people. If it's white people, that's when they do it, they don't even either they don't mention it, or that's just an anomaly. That's not a regular thing. But when it's us, it's everybody. They pathologize all of everything that somebody. The low-hanging fruit, what they do. So my question is this. They teach that all so-called black people were in bondage. All so-called black people got African ancestry. That's a lie. That's a damn lie. And who said that? These pathological lying racist Caucasians. The pathological lying racist Caucasians. They teach that lie. That all black people came over here on some African slave ship. Listen, we know African. We're not stupid. We are not stupid. We know Africans when we see them. Tell me I'm wrong. Do we not know Africans when we see them? See, they want us not to think. They want to tell us what to think. They want to tell us what to believe. And it's sad that you got a lot of simple-minded black people who believe this nonsense. You got a lot of simple-minded black people that believe this nonsense. These are the same people that believe they got black skin. Can you fathom that? Tariq Nasheed said we got black skin. Do we got black skin? Do I got black skin? He said we black skin people. Do we got black skin? These are the same people that told we got black skin. Our skin is black. Right there. Once somebody telling you that you got black skin, that your skin is not what we see in that bronze copper colored skin that we seeing. Once somebody telling you got black skin and you can clearly see, you don't stop listening to them. Stop listening to them. Once somebody tell you you got black skin, and you're trying to get us to believe something. Once somebody tell me that, I stop listening to you. You gonna tell me, because I keep doing this again, and why I keep pointing out the black skin thing is because, you know, whenever they with the white man, anybody who dark complexion, they gonna call you black, but you can clearly see you don't have black skin. He just makes reference to the darkest people as black people, right? But yeah, it's funny he don't call the Hindus, the East Indians with the straight hair, who just as dark as us or even darker, but you can clearly see there's a difference between us and them. He don't call them black people. Now, do he? Do he call those people black people? Does my skin look like this? Again, once somebody tell you that, once somebody say that we got black skin, and you can clearly see we don't, and then they're going to try to then explain to us and try to claim they teach them, stop listening to them. Because they're trying to get you to believe something. Same way the so-called white man was getting you to believe something. That goes right back to, I told you, to the early 1900s of blackface. That goes all the way back to the early 1900s with blackface. When the white man was doing all this blackface, so-called blackface comedy, and he was calling himself making fun of our people and talking about how big our lips is and this, that, and the third. But you know, here's the funny thing about that. When they were showing them dark-skinned people with the red lips and things like that, if you go back and look at the indigenous statues, with the people in the feathered head crowns, that looks like those people they making fun of. They making fun of the indigenous people with dark skin. They wasn't as black as that with red lips. They was making fun of the indigenous people in the indigenous statues. Go back and look at that. They're not making fun of Africans. They're making fun of the indigenous people. You see? The ones who got the feathered headdresses on, because they'll sit up here and say, yeah, on these slave bills, these people came from Gambia and these people came from Africa. Okay, so if they African, why they got feathered head crowns on? Why they had on those feathered head crowns to go up in the air on the slave documents? Because I'm gonna tell you why on those slave manifests and those slave advertisements they had Africa and places like that, because there was a law that was passed. You can look this up. There was a law that was passed in the 1800s that they could no longer enslave indigenous people, because everybody knew they was grabbing up indigenous people from different tribes. You had a bunch of marauding white males going out here, that was going out here, and they had help. The Native Americans was helping them. That's when the Mongoloid natives started coming around. They came in through Mexico. They was helping the Caucasians, along with a few dirty indigenous black tribes. They was helping the so-called white man go out here and catch slaves from indigenous tribes, helping them take their land. Our people had land. They would just come up and take land from our people, right? Because in those narratives I read about these women in the 30s who was talking about they grandmothers was in slavery. Their grandmothers told them we got kidnapped. They would just grab us up and take us, and we'd be sold into slavery in Mississippi. They was taking people from Georgia, North Carolina, kidnapping children, young adults, and you never saw them again. They'd be sold into slavery in Mississippi. And this was allowed to go on. Now, let me tell you why the government pushes this idea of a transatlantic slave trade. I'm going to tell you why they would rather say that it was a transatlantic slave trade as opposed to what it really was, which would be considered today's so-called human trafficking. Because they don't want to make it seem as though that the government was okay with trafficking in our people being okay, because they knew where the slaves were coming from. The government knew that they was kidnapping indigenous people and forcing them into slavery. They knew there was bands of racist white Caucasians, again, slave catchers. Remember I said slave catchers was not just the people that was catching the slaves that ran off the plantation. They was going out and catching slaves. It wasn't just, we slave catchers on the plantation. They had patrols of white males on horses that would go out, and they had Indians help, these Mongoloid Native Americans helping them, and they had some dirty turncoat indigenous black people helping them. They would go out in bands and groups, and they would catch indigenous people, black people, and indigenous black people, and would bring them and force them into slavery and sell them in places like Mississippi. They would ship them off to places and whatnot. Now, it would make sense that you would capture these people because they already were here. So it would be easier to make them slaves than going to get a damn African. It would be easier to make them slaves because they knew the language, and they're not violent people, because keep in mind, they took children. They took children. They took young men, young boys, and children. They took them because they're easy to intimidate. They didn't really take men like that. And a lot of times they were using our own people to go out here and snare people into slavery. They would use our own people to do this. See, they don't want to talk about that part. They use other black people, so-called black and free people who was roaming around with them to go out here and catch indigenous people. Kind of like the police today. Think about it. It's kind of like the police today. How they'll let black males be on the force. They'll let Latinos, because that's who your Native Americans are today, your Latinos, who are not the real American Indians. They get on the police force and they go out here and try and do what? They go out here and set up a lot of black people. Not saying black people don't commit crimes, but they set up black people, set up especially black men, and throw them in jail. Next thing you know, you locked up somewhere and you working repairing roads, or you doing all kind of work for the state. You become property of the state. Notice that, state property. Remember Beanie Siegel and made that movie State Property? You become property of the state. Usually they got you out somewhere working, picking up trash, doing things. They had slaves and slaves someplace in Mississippi or whatnot. They had not slaves, prisoners, which is the same thing. Prisoners, they had them out there picking cotton. They had them out there putting out forest fires in Los Angeles. They still have the prison system, aka the slave system, going. You see, where they could set you up and plant some drugs on you, or whatever the case may be. Next thing you know, oh, what's this right here? Or I smell weed. Next thing you know, you locked up for 2 weeks or a month or whatever, and you got to go out and pick up stuff. That's just a soft version of what they used to do. They used to just grab people. They used to do that in the 20s and the 30s all the time. That's why you had a lot of so-called black men on chain gangs. And, they criminalize everything. Oh, you loitering. That's where that loitering thing came from. Oh, you standing around too long. What you doing out at night? Where your ID and all this stuff. Oh, you going to jail. Put your hands behind your back. And next thing you know, you on a chain gang. That's slavery. All that is softer versions of slavery. Y'all clear on that? That's all that is. The law enforcement was a softer version, became a soft version of what they used to do in slavery, where they would catch indigenous people, black people, and force them into slavery. And then when slavery was abolished, they came with the law that, if you commit a crime, then you become property of the state. So in other words, you became state property. Instead of being property of an individual Caucasian male, you become state property. And that's how they got a lot of, because they didn't want to stop slavery. They wanted to keep our people working, right? They wanted our women to stay watching their children, because they'll sit up here and talk about how they civilized us. And I'm like, how you civilized our people? How you civilized our people? They talking about how they civilized our people, right? And that they, taught us how to wash ourselves and clean ourselves and all this other nonsense. But yet these people were in England, they were filthy. If they had bad hygiene in England, which they did, you could look up on all the plagues and things they had over there because of their bad hygiene. All of a sudden, you mean to tell me they came over to America and their hygiene got better? Their hygiene got better all of a sudden when they came over into America? What happened with the English and all these Caucasians who came over here who had bad hygiene? What happened to all of a sudden they know how to wash themselves and they wash their hair? What happened to make them start washing themselves and cleaning themselves up? Answer, they came in contact with us. So it was really the other way around. To this day, a lot of these Caucasians, they don't even use washcloths. They They get fleas and ticks in their hair. And again, I'm not saying all white people, but a lot of them don't even wash themselves properly. They'll admit it. They don't even wash themselves, but they taught us. You see, they make up things and they tell lies. What you have to understand is these people are pathological liars. These racist Caucasians who make up this history that you simple-minded Negroes sit up here believing, these are pathological liars. They make up stuff and everything. Notice all the history that they claim they giving you, the real history. It's always, you ain't nothing, we ain't shit, we ain't did nothing, we all was a bunch of slaves, we was a bunch of savages in Africa swinging in trees. But then when you debunk that, when you really bring out the truth, they all of a sudden it's silence. When you bring out how they really was living in Europe, how they was living when they got here in America, how they was cannibalizing on each other because they didn't have no real food source. They didn't know how to farm. They didn't know how to they didn't really know how to catch and hunt like that. They didn't know how to hunt. They basically relied on the American indigenous people that was here, so-called black people that helped them. They relied on us heavily. They relied on our people heavily. A lot of times they starved in these places. They ended up eating each other, cannibalizing on each other. Look up the Donner Party. Look up it was another book about how they, I forget, it was called Hard Times. I forget what it's called, but it was before they set up the colony in Jamestown, Virginia. That's why Virginia is one of the most racist states here in America, because that's where slavery started. Slavery, well, successful slavery. Slavery was started up in the North, but it wasn't successful until it got into Virginia in the South, into what Virginia is not even technically the South. It's still kind of technically the North, right? But they got the first successful slave settlement, aka colony in Virginia, was when they started kidnapping the indigenous people. And in South Carolina, the Carolina Indians are described as black people with woolly, bushy hair and dark skin. They call us black people. Back then, they was trying to call us black. Anybody with dark skin, they call you black, right? With bushy hair. That was the description of the Carolina Indians. That's not the Native Americans you see today. The description of the Carolina Indians is black people. The people that are buried in these indigenous, and a lot of these indigenous, and it came out, I'm gonna bring up a documentary on that. A lot of the people they found in a lot of these Indian burial grounds in America, in the Indian burial grounds with so-called black people. How that happened? How is it that you go to a lot of these indigenous burial grounds in places like the Carolinas and Georgia, right? And they was digging up the bones of the people and checking out their genetics and DNA. It was black people. Go look that up. Why is all these black people in these Indian burial grounds if they're not Indians? And these are not the people who are mixed with the Mongolians, because they love to show you the Mongolians, the Asians that mixed in with our people. And you don't even see those people anymore. But that's showing you that the original people, before they started mixing in with the Asians, because when you see the real dark-skinned people like us, when they got the really straight hair and the slanted eyes and the Asian features, that's some of our people that let the Asians mix in with our people. That's when your Native Americans started showing up. This was like around the 1800s. But prior to that, when you start talking about the 1500s, 1550, 42, where Verrazano talked about the Carolina Indians as black people, he said these are black people. So-called with woolly, bushy hair. They was wearing little tails behind their head, little ponytails, right? Like a lot of our people did that before. That's what the description was they were giving of the American Indians back then. They were always describing black people as the Indians. Now, all of a sudden, these Native Americans come. There was a guy on my page when I asked the question. I said, what did the Native Americans contribute to America? I asked the question. I said, since these people are supposed to be indigenous, which they're not indigenous to America, the Native Americans, they're not indigenous to America, they're Asians. You could clearly still see that. A lot of the people that's in Mexico and in these so-called indigenous reservations, these are Asiatic people. These are Asians. They are Asian, Siberian, Mongolian, Siberian heritage. And it's taught, they're being taught, or they were misinformed that these are supposed to be the indigenous people. They're not. Native Americans are not indigenous. And this guy, I asked the question, I said, if these people been here the longest, what have they contributed to America? And this guy starts talking about the medicine. He said medicine they contributed. He said that they could, because a lot of them are pathological liars too. Don't listen to the so-called Native Americans. They're pathological liars too. They no different than the white man. I told you they was helping the so-called white man capture the real American indigenous people, us. They was helping them. And even to this day, if you listen to a lot of these Native Americans, they just as racist as the white man. When they go to prison, they get clicked up with the white Aryan Brotherhood. A lot of them so-called Native Americans, they get hooked up right with them. You see, and they let the white man be a Native American. He could live on their reservation, on the res, in their trailer parks, right? Because they live just like the poor white people. They live in trailer parks. A lot of them, they got alcoholism, all this stuff. Their reservations look like shit. A lot of them. They don't take care of their reservation, but these are supposed to be the original people. These are supposed to be the people that built the mounds here and all this stuff. No. So this guy says that the Native Americans, they brought medicine. What medicine? Because when they start talking about their accomplishments here, what they accomplished in America, they start talking about us. They trying to steal our history. They ain't bring no medicine nowhere. And I asked, what medicine did they bring? And I said, if they brought medicine, Native Americans had medicine, then how come y'all was able to, how come y'all died off? Because that's the story, that a lot of y'all died off from smallpox when the white man put smallpox in the blankets. How come y'all died off? How come y'all didn't have no medicine to save yourselves? See, the history of the Native American goes like this. They came in from Siberia, and a lot of them were brought in to Latin America, which is now called Latin America, and places like Mexico and all that. These were Asians that were brought in, and they mixed in with the indigenous people, and they started taking on the American Indian, culture, our culture. And when they came into North America from Mexico and places like that, and they started spreading out all in the West Coast, they would go into places, they would move into places. They noticed they're never really in the East Coast like that. They're always on the West Coast because they came in through Mexico. They came to Texas, all these other places, right? And when the Europeans were starting to move, when the white men in the United States were starting to move further and further west, they would come in contact with these people. They would fight, and they would basically make these people move. So they were squatting on the land, all right, living off the land as opposed to living on the land, because living on the land means you're building on the land. They ain't never built nothing on the land. They was always showing you them in teepees. They've never shown you any so-called Native Americans that built anything. And how you know it's the truth, because they never dispute that. They never dispute that they were living in teepees. They never dispute that they wasn't farming any land. They didn't know how to farm anything. They didn't know how to build anything. They was living in teepees. And that's part of their Siberian culture, because I was watching a documentary where they were showing how they had those teepees in Siberia, and they would show how they would break down, basically like a tent. They would break down, they could put them back up, and they would basically live like nomads, and they would travel all over, because once the U.S. government would just move them out of the way, they would just basically, they would fight with them. Then the white man said, listen, okay, I'm gonna go and just give y'all this land, which became the reservation, and that's how they got there. But keep in mind, they have never built anything in America. They have never contributed anything to America. That's a lie. The only thing they did was help the white man capture our people. This is why the white man allowed them to own slaves, own our people. Check out the book, Red Masters, Black Slaves, because they were allowed to own slaves because they were helping the so-called white man catch slaves. You even had turncoat blacks that had slaves, that had owned indigenous people, like the Ellison family, like that guy, what's the guy's name? Anthony Johnson. Now, if this guy Anthony Johnson, they say he's the first slave owner in America. Anthony Johnson, so-called black man, he don't look African. Stop it. He's not African. How is it a black dude named Anthony Johnson who don't look African? He look indigenous. He like American, regular American so-called black man. If you saw him, he got the same woolly hair. He don't look there's nothing African about him. Why was he allowed to own slaves? And there was a lot of them that had slaves in the South. Why were they allowed to own slaves? Because they were helping the white man catch slaves, and they didn't enslave them. You see, it's a lot they don't tell you about slavery, which again, if you put it all together, it makes sense. When the Caucasians came over here, they needed help. They was down bad. They didn't know how to survive here. So that's why it sounds ridiculous when you talk about how they went to whole nother continent. They come from Europe. They don't even know how to make it here. So when you mean to tell me they're going to jump on boats and go and get Africans, more immigrants to bring over here who can't speak the language y'all already messed up over here? Well, do that even make sense? That you would go as an immigrant, you already an immigrant, a stranger in the land, and y'all down bad. So you're going to go get a bunch of people who you then got to find food for, feed and house and clothe, to pick cotton. Do that even make sense? Do that even make sense? Yeah, they still nomadic to this day. They're still nomadic. Look at their reservations. That tell you how they was living. Look at their reservations. What medicine did I asked the guy in there, I said, what did y'all contribute? Oh, we contribute a lot. We contribute corn and potatoes. Corn and potatoes grow out the ground. And the guy who was the potato king, why is it that a so-called black man or so-called African, why is he became a multi-millionaire? A guy by the name, I got him on my page. What's his name? He was called the Potato King, as he was he shipped potatoes back to Ireland. Now, Ireland's supposed to be known for potatoes, but they were starving over there in Ireland. This guy's name is, I'm gonna tell you what his name is in a second. You could look him up. He became a millionaire in the 19th century and the 20th century. They called him the Potato King, Junius George Groves, Potato King of the Old West. He was raising potatoes and things like that, harvesting potatoes and things. So how is it that this so-called black man is the Potato King, yet y'all claim, the Native Americans claim, oh, we was coming up with all, raising all these foods? They was not. They was not. You've never seen, they never show you no Native American farmers. They never did. They didn't know how to grow anything either. That proves they're not indigenous to the land. How you been here all this long and you don't know how to, and you needed slaves to do the work, because they was using the slaves the same way the white man was using them to grow things, to harvest things, food, cotton, everything else. Because the slaves wasn't just picking no cotton, they was growing the cotton. They was growing and harvesting the cotton. They was growing and harvesting the food. Does that not make sense that you would take those people and put them in slavery because they want you to think that those people don't exist? Or it was just some Africans they brought over here and everybody was African and they just got y'all to pick cotton. You see how stupid that sounds? You see how dumb that sounds? And it's sad because, again, we going with what logically makes sense versus what don't make sense. You see how dumb that sounds? Exactly. They still don't know how to farm. I've never seen no Native American farmers, and if they did, they got taught that recently. They don't know how to farm no land. When the last time you heard of any Native American farmers or farmers markets? Any markets they got, they just learned how to. They didn't know how to do that back then, and they never dispute that depiction of themselves. They never dispute that they was living in teepees and farming and not farming. They was living in teepees and basically hunting buffalo. Basically, their food source was whatever they could hunt, buffalo, whatever they was eating, whatever animals they could eat, and whatever they can, if they had some little bit of corn or something like that. But that was their diet. Their diet was a meat diet. They was hunting animals and just burning them by a campfire. That's how they live. But these the indigenous people. These the people. But yet you got these Africans supposedly who was growing, you just bought them. So who harvested? Because again, cotton don't just grow. Cotton don't just grow. Sugar don't just grow. Tobacco don't just grow. You got to know how to harvest that. And that was the cash crop. That's why the Europeans wanted to be over here so bad, because that's how they made all this money and created the economy off of the land. What the indigenous black people grew. Stop calling our people Africans. That is an insult to our ancestors. Umar Johnson, black ass, just passed out the other day. You know why? And I'll say this. I'm going to just say it like this. Umar Johnson, you've been sitting up here lying about our ancestors being African. So now it just seemed like they struck back at you. They struck back at you. Yeah, ancestral vengeance is real. Ancestral vengeance. And I'd say this to all you so-called black people out here that's teaching this lie that our ancestors are African, that we got some African DNA. We ain't got no goddamn African DNA. How we got African DNA when we don't even look the same? That's like saying we all the same with the white man. Them. How we the same as them? We don't even look the same. When this racist Caucasian, this cracker going to talk about, oh, we taught the blacks how to comb their hair. How you teach us how to comb our hair and we ain't even got the same kind of hair? Y'all, we ain't got no fleas and ticks in our hair like y'all. We don't get no fleas and ticks. Y'all don't even know how to wash yourself. How you want to teach us how to wash ourselves and comb our hair? And if that's the case, why you had our women taking care of your children, nursing your children? If we such filthy and dirty and uncivilized people, why was you trying to rape our women? Why was you up here have us taking care of your little cracklets? How come you had us up here taking care of them? You see, who really civilized who? Who really cleaned up who? Who really washed who? My women was washing your babies, nursing your babies, cleaning up after you. Even to this day, they always have black women cleaning up their houses and stuff like that. But y'all supposed to taught us how to be clean, huh? People who don't even use washcloths to this day. They lying, man. These people are pathological liars. And for our people to sit up here and believe this BS they say, and like I said, again, anybody that's telling me I got black skin, I stop listening to you. I listen to you still, Tariq Nasheed, because you bring out some truth. But the fact that you sit up here talking about we got black skin, you saying this crazy shit, Tariq Nasheed, you trying to convince us we got black skin and we came over here from Africa. What good would African slaves have done here in America? I keep asking that. Same way I asked the question, what did Native Americans, so-called Native Americans, contribute to America? The guy who I asked the question, he couldn't give me no real answer. He said we corn and all. He just about making up shit, right? Like they lie, corn, and we bought medicines. I said, then why y'all couldn't fight off the smallpox that the white man gave you in them blankets? Why y'all living on reservations? I said, where's your music at? Because if you are culture, if you are the indigenous culture of the land, we should know more about your culture. How come our people, you claim we from Africa, all of us from Africa, but our culture rules America? Our music, our jazz, our blues, our country, our R&B music we created that we have forgot, a rock and roll. That's all our music, hip hop, rap. Y'all ain't got no music other than banging on drums and making a bunch of goddamn noise and calling that traditional or whatever. That's what y'all got. Then you're trying to claim some of our black American indigenous people like Michael Jackson, James Brown. Oh, they mixed with Native American. No, they are not. No, they are not. They are American Indians, and they are black American, so-called black. I'm just using this term, black indigenous people who go back to the Mayans, the Aztec. That's how we got here. We got over here as the Mesoamericans, as the Aztec and the Mayans. That's how we got here. We've been in America. Ain't nobody bring us here, and we ain't got American indigenous blood through mixing with y'all. So miss me with this, oh, y'all need to take a DNA test. A DNA test for what? Because what is it supposed to mean? Oh, if we got some of your blood in us, because what is considered American indigenous blood? Y'all blood? Y'all blood. So in other words, you're saying American indigenous blood is your blood. Y'all got Asian blood. Y'all got Mongolian blood. It's already been proven that y'all are Siberians. There's plenty of documentaries on it. They even asked the question, why do a lot of Mexicans look Asian? Because they are. They are. From the Asian slave trade where they brought you over. Notice they don't talk about that. Again, I'm going to keep bringing up that book because this guy never brought me nothing. He ain't gave me no names. I said, give me your Native Americans who got patents and trademarks in the Patent and Trademark Office, in the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Give me some of your indigenous people that get pioneered something since they've been here for so long, since they've been here longer than the so-called black people and the white man. So give me some of your people that gave inventions and stuff. No, not one name. No, not one. We Native Americans, we did. No. I want names, because if we said that we did this, what names? What's their name? They be asking us in browbeat, what names? Who did this? I gave you names. I can give you names. They'll ask us all these questions and whatnot, but when you ask them, silence. Miss me with that. So the transatlantic slave trade is BS. There's no transatlantic slave trade. They enslaved the indigenous people here only, because it would make sense that they would only enslave them because they know how to do everything. They was here before Caucasians, here before these Mongolian Native Americans. We're the indigenous people of this land, the only real Americans. And that's all. So again, that's a load of BS. I'm going to be on TikTok tomorrow. I'm going to address something else. What am I going to? I'm supposed to be talking on. Well, I said I was going to talk on. Hold on. I want to get this up. Let me see. The real reason why Black Americans were not granted American citizenship. I'm going to be on TikTok talking about that tomorrow. So catch me live on TikTok with that. And so I'm about to wrap this up. I'm doing my broadcast tonight. Please subscribe to my channel on Mentellect channel, the Mentellect Patreon channel. Subscribe to my Mentellect Patreon channel. It's my nightly cast I do where I can't say certain things on here that I say on there. So subscribe to my Mentellect Patreon channel. Join the Republic of America. Become a indigenous registered American in the Republic of America. Become an IRA, an indigenous registered American in the Republic of America. Republic of America, ROA Worldwide. Go down below, hit the link, ROA Worldwide, and become an indigenous registered American in the Republic of America. It's time we had our own American community based on who we are as American indigenous people. The hell with all that African BS. Bye, Umar. The hell with all that Pan-African garbage. The hell with all these lies and all the slave ship nonsense. We was always here in America. And how they got slaves by kidnapping our people and mass going taking over whole villages of our people and laying the plantation down right in the middle of the damn villages we built. That's how slavery got started. Cut the bull crap. See, the reason why the government teaches that is because they would rather you believe that Africans sold other Africans into slavery to the white man. So they want to make it seem like it was a transactional deal as opposed to what it really was, human trafficking. It was human trafficking. See, the government don't want to be known for basically giving a nod to that it's okay to enslave and kidnap the indigenous people. But a law was passed in the 1800s. I forget what year it was. I'm gonna find that year where they said they can no longer enslave the indigenous people. So that proves they was enslaving the indigenous people. And it wasn't the Native Americans. They was enslaving us. And once they did that, that's when they started putting, these are Africans. They started calling us Africans then. You see, they from Gambia and all. They started putting all this nonsense on it because that's when they started changing the indigenous slaves, the Negroes. Because remember, we was called American Negroes before they started calling us African American. When they put American in front, that denotes that that's really where you come from. Like when they say the Italian American, French, what they put in front is where you come from. When they put American in front of our names, that denotes where we come from. Now they stopped doing that and they flipped it to call us African Americans, thanks to Jesse Jackson, one of their pawns. So check that out. So I'm going to be talking on that tomorrow, among other things. Join the Republic of America Worldwide, ROA Worldwide. Go to our site. This is for indigenous registered Americans, our people. We need our own community, our own real American community. No more African American community. That's BS. No more black community. There's no black community. That's BS. So join the Republic of America, ROA Worldwide. Also, please hit the donation down below. We have in our American Indigenous Street and Music Festival. Y'all see I'm rocking the shirt. Got the shirt on. The American Indigenous shirt. I'm going to have these for sale. We're going to have sweatshirts like this, crew necks, and T-shirts. And we're going to have some for the women as well with the women headdress on. So that's coming. So go down below and hit the link for the American Indigenous Street and Music Festival 2026. Please support that. We're trying to raise $24,000. We're going to be doing it again this year for 2026. We did it this year just in June. So we're going to be doing it again May 2026 in Atlanta, Georgia, celebrating our American Indigenous heritage. Come on out, celebrate our American Indigenous heritage. Let's be a real American Indigenous community, a real American community. Let's cut out all this tribal BS. Let's cut out all this black BS, all this African American nonsense, all the bullshit slave ship stories that's going out the door. Reality is coming forward, and that's it. So thank you all for joining me. I'm gonna close this out, and I'm not trusting, I'm not thinking, and I'm not deliver this message. What am I closing out with? Gotta get ready for my show. All right. Good night.
We should stay.